was like, oh crap, where's the sidebar? How come I can't see the intro? Like deer in the headlight look. So you got to make the window big enough to actually see all the fun stuff.
There you go.
Hi.
Technology.
Welcome
Always
to
some
Momentous.
snafus.
Exactly. Oh boy, let's last half hour. Momentous Live, episode 36. I'm Tristan Jutra, and I am joined by the one and only, the incomparable
Ignominious. I would prefer ignominious.
Ignoramus works for me.
Yeah, ignoramus. That's exactly what I said. Yeah, Jamie Reynolds. Nice to see you. Just you and me today.
Yeah, it must have been something I said. So we expect Gray back next week. Tasia had to bail. Not sure why. And Will's traveling. And then we have a few other regular guests that join us, but none of them were available. So we just got the dregs.
So I'm right at the bottom of that particular barrel. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that.
Exactly. Well, you're like, when they make whiskey, isn't like all the good stuff at the bottom of the barrel?
No, I think that's where the arsenic goes, but whatever.
So that means I'm old lace. Is that how this works?
When whatever turns your crank, whatever your wife likes to nickname me is fine by me.
So Momentous Live, episode 36, also known as Grumpy Old Men, diving into the metaverse and more. So let's get to it, shall we?
Let's do it.
Let's start with a little bit of follow-up. You weren't here with us last week, Jamie. We were joined by Get Smythe. When we have Get on, we usually talk about automotive and entertainment. But one of the stories we touched on had to do with Ford and they have this thing called the crate motor, which they use for retrofitting internal combustion engine vehicles. And it's got great appeal to hobbyists that want to upgrade their old gasoline powered cars. So it's known as the crate engine, electric crate motor, and it goes for about $3,600, I believe, and they are already sold out. No. And here's an example of I believe it's an old F100 that was tricked out, and basically it's the motor and drivetrain from the Mustang Mach-E, which has been doing quite well, pretty well reviewed, and they've got other variations coming there. So I think this is an interesting angle on the whole EV revolution, because right now there are currently only so many options when it comes to new EVs. You see Teslas more and more, and they kind of all look the same, no matter what model, if it's the Model X or the Model S or the Model Y or the Model 3. They're just slightly different sizes and shapes, but they all kind of look the same. And a lot of that's for aerodynamics. And then we're seeing offerings from others such as Chevy with the Bolt, and Audi with the e-tron and the like. But if you can put an electric motor in a 1978 Ford F100, the sky's the limit here, Jamie. So do you see, what could you see yourself, as opposed to plopping down anywhere from 45 up to 150K for a tricked out EV, to go this sort of route and and add some new life to an older or even a classic vehicle that you came across, like your mom's old Porsche, if that was still in the family, for example?
Right, yeah. Well, it's something that I know has existed for a while. One of my former employees, part of his hobby was actually taking vehicles and turning them electric. This is before Tesla. This is before things were doing that. So this kind of thing has existed in the marketplace for quite a while. But being able to do this, I don't know how simple this is. I didn't do a lot of research into this particular article because I thought I had somebody else who's going to be looking at it. But I was assuming that that changing the engine out to put this crate engine in doesn't seem like the tough part. The tough part would be the battery. Isn't the battery the big issue with Tesla? I don't know where does the battery go in a let's say you had an old Pinto. You probably want to get rid of that particular gas tank and replace that with a battery, but do you strap it on the roof? Do you put it underneath? Not all vehicles are pickups.
Let's go with roof.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know if the discussion about this has included anything about the actual batteries rather than just the engine, but the engine actually really seems like the easy part to me.
And we did touch on that last week, is that this price point we're talking about, $3,600 US for the electric crate motors, for the motor and initial part of the drivetrain itself, but not the full conversion nor the batteries. So this is for serious hobbyists. But I mean, I've seen a lot of talk online for quite a while about people who are, the enthusiasts, the automotive enthusiasts, who are not big fans of the kind of designs they're seeing and would love to be able to retrofit some classic vehicles, because
Oh yeah,
vehicle design has become so homogenous the last number of years, largely for
absolutely.
aerodynamic and fuel efficiency reasons, right?
Yes.
So, but that comes at the loss of distinctiveness and personality for a lot. You don't see cars like the styles
Yeah.
from the 60s and 70s anymore.
It's so true. So I think this is as battery technology improves, I think this will become more and more commonplace. Um, the I guess again at this point, it, I don't know what kind of range they get based on what kind of battery technology they have, but the issue for all types of this technology lately seems to have been hinging on battery technology and how best to store the energy. So, if I think one way of actually saving a lot of resources from going into the bin or getting recycled would be to just take your existing vehicle if you like it, yeah, and throw this in there and make it work. Even if you only get a quarter of the range, hey, you know what? It would be a fun way to keep vehicles going, especially as we're trying to actually wean ourselves off of oil and gasoline, that type of thing. It seems like it's something that has probably not even just a niche market, but probably a fairly decent market to get into. And if it's selling that quickly, well, again, maybe they made 8 of them, and that's why they're sold out. But it's probably something that people could get onto if it's easy enough to do. Yeah, I don't know what the cost of actually retrofitting it is. And buy the engine's one thing, but to actually take the existing one out, and you have to change the drivetrain as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, it'll connect into the drivetrain up to a certain point, but
Okay. Yeah.
so I think you make a good point. Is that it will really depend on how turnkey this is. I suspect you're going to see all sorts of either existing garages or new garages popping up that specialize in this sort of thing, if they can get the prices manageable. And of course, this is going to start at the higher end, with people with the
Mhm.
disposable income that really want to keep their favorite cars. But you think about, in the larger scheme of things, like, rather than having all these old internal combustion cars just going to the crusher,
Mhm.
like, being able to actually keep some of these vehicles on the road. I mean, they're not going to be as efficient because they're not going to have the aerodynamics, but at least we will have some variety on the roads, and
I
not as
agree.
many vehicles going to the crusher for no good reason.
And
So
again, I think this will be all aided and abetted by this battery tech. If we can find a way to get more energy into batteries, it'll become a no-brainer in many cases to take an old gas-guzzling vehicle, if you like it, an old Dodge Charger, and throw in an electric vehicle into that. Might not sound the same, but you could put the big thumping speakers on the side if you need to, just to really rock your neighbor's world.
exactly. So speaking of motors, Space Force, one of the newest divisions of the American, sort of the United States Armed Forces, detected a mystery object in orbit alongside a Chinese satellite that was recently launched, and they're calling it an apogee kick motor. But the object's true identity and purpose remain unknown. I mean, this is just a little quick story that we're going to talk to. It's just because of course, the first time I saw an unknown object in orbit, I thought of you, Jamie. So,
Oh, of course. Yeah. Little green man, that's all about me there. Yeah.
so is this another Tic Tac, or is this just junk from what you can tell?
Yeah, from what I looked at into it, it could be anything, but even some deception on the part of the Chinese space program, just to distract from what's actually going on. But yeah, it seems like it's probably just part of their whatever they're putting up there. I believe it's a space junk um, uh, activity that they're doing. Maybe it's a target of sorts. It maybe they put that out there and then they go capture it, that kind of thing. There was an interesting, just as a quick aside, I was reading an article earlier about how the Chinese have apparently created mocked up structures somewhere in a target range that match the look of and size and scale of aircraft carriers, American aircraft carriers and destroyers. So who knows? Maybe this is another type of target practice that they're doing up in space that they're doing down here. You never
Perfect.
know.
And here, of course, here, Momentous, we fully endorse all the activities of the Chinese government and have nothing critical to say whatsoever.
Correct. Absolutely.
So yeah, so apparently these apogee kick motors are used to help with fine positioning of vehicles and craft in space. So when it comes to satellites and trying to get things pieces docked together and whatnot. So Occam's razor would dictate that it is something like that, but there's a lot of speculation at the moment because, of course, the Chinese authorities aren't saying anything at this point. And this rocket went up on October 23rd, so it's been a few weeks so far. So stay tuned for more excitement there. So next up in space news, it's funny. And this again, just another quick hit here, but I thought it was interesting that the SpaceX Crew 2 astronaut launch, they just touched down recently, and then we've already got Crew 3 going up. It was supposed to be going up tomorrow, and you just don't see, because it's almost like what happened with the space shuttle, but it took years for that to happen in space, where it's just become so routine now, and we're getting these SpaceX flights, this private industry, private company doing these contract flights for NASA, but after a couple, it's like, well, it's just, it's not even news anymore, and they're just going up and down. So So I'm just looking for your perspective. Have we gotten blasé about the miracle of space flight? Already?
Absolutely. This same thing happened with the Apollo program back in the 60s and then the 70s, where these rockets would go up and they would land a man on the moon, and then they would land somebody else on the moon. Can you name the second the Apollo, what was it, Apollo 11 that landed on the moon, is that right? And then can you name the Apollo 12 astronauts?
Exactly.
Can the second group on the moon? You can't, because you do lose interest in all these types of things, and which ultimately is really the point. This whole SpaceX, Blue Origin, all these types of commercial applications or commercial endeavors to get people into space is all about trying to make it a commercial, interesting thing. It's just, okay, we just got to get people into space to do what they're going to do. It's the travel. It seems to be. It used to be really exciting, and it still is pretty exciting to watch some of these SpaceX rockets come down and land by themselves, the booster rockets. But to get people into space, you know what? I think that is the point. Just make it boring, get people back and forth, make it comfortable so people don't even think about it anymore. Then it becomes easier to commercialize it, to make it more of a tourist type of thing, as we saw with Bill Shatner a couple of weeks ago, Captain Kirk, going up with the Blue Origin, and just make it an event, and then it's less about the actual activity of flying into space, and it's more about being in space, and that's what we're actually trying to get to. So I think this is all human nature, but it's also on purpose at the same time.
We'll get there eventually. And you mentioned space tourism. There was another story that came through this week, how Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's space company, has just increased the price of their tickets for their sort of low Earth orbit trips to $450,000. And they've already sold, I believe, 100 of those tickets. So, there's interest there. And if they can get some of this, R&D sort of subsidized by people with money to burn, then heck, cool. But Absolutely. It's funny because Virgin Galactic is really focusing on the consumer side of things.
They are, yeah.
As opposed to Blue Origin and SpaceX, which are really going for the commercial and government contracts. So different niches there to explore, and it's exciting, and that's the thing. Is like it's easy to get blasé, but like every time something especially when they get people into space and get them back alive, it is truly remarkable. So I just don't want us to lose that sense of wonder.
Well, but it's the same thing if you look at plane flights. It's that first plane flight was pretty fantastic, and they came back down to Earth and they were okay. And then somebody else does it. It's amazing. Look at this, another flight. Oh wow, there's now people talking about creating companies that have multiple airplanes that can fly people different places. And now everybody just hates flying on planes. phones. It's not magical at all. I still think it's kind of magical, but it's really one of these things where, no matter what the technology is, the more you have it, if you grow up with it, especially, all of a sudden it's like our phones, all our technology here. We have these things, and this is like living in future Star Trek world, that we can just have access to the sum total of human knowledge at any point that we want. And I'm kind of blasé about that now. I think about it and I think, wow, that is pretty amazing that we have it. But kids that grow up with it, it's part of their body now. They just don't even think about it. It's just what they have.
It reminds me of that bit, the comedy bit. I think he was on Conan O'Brien, Louis C.K. Since canceled Louis C.K.
He's trying to come back.
He's talking about how everything is amazing and no one's happy.
Exactly.
And referring to the miracle of even just airplane travel. It's like you're sitting in a chair in the sky.
It's totally true. In a metal tube.
Yeah, and I can't get Wi-Fi.
I know. Yeah. So this is what happens with all technology. And it's part of our evolution. I'm not really sure. It's something that it's almost like a budgetary conundrum that you have. With a budget. If you don't use up all the budget, then your budget reduces, or if you go over budget, then you can increase the budget for next time. So you have to feed the machine of to ever increase in order to keep things fresh and new and keep people interested.
Well, yeah, you got to get habituated to,
yes.
to certain things. Otherwise, you would just be like, oh my God, like all the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you got to make space for new things to amaze you. So speaking of new things to amaze us that are related to space, I mean, I never thought I would see this day, come to pass. But Heinz debuts Mars Edition ketchup made with tomatoes, grown in Mars conditions.
Can I pull the rug out now? Is it my turn to pull the rug out?
I think I know exactly what you're going to say, but please, that is your job here on Momentous, the official.
This is garbage PR. This is typical corporate subterfuge. This has nothing to do with Mars. This is like, this is just made on Earth, and we've analyzed what Martian soil is, and we've made the soil on Earth, and so therefore it's Mars tomatoes, and it makes no sense. That you got to have a different gravity. I can't remember what the difference in gravity is on Mars. Is it half the size of Earth?
Yes, I think it's 0.6 G.
0.6 G. But as soon as they can actually grow something on Mars, then you can call it Mars ketchup. Until then, no. This is actually, somebody should be put in jail over this. This is blatant false advertising, and I think somebody should be tarred and feathered. Put out like Arnold Schwarzenegger was at the end of the only real Total Recall movie, and have his eyes bulge out of his head.
Well, I would expect no less from you then to help us keep it real here, talking about
keep it real, man.
Marketing stunts. But what it does is it does open the door for either them or others to take advantage of certain products that may actually eventually get some space exposure. So like seeds that are germinated in space, and then you make ketchup with those tomatoes, and you spend $400,000 a bottle, maybe. Right?
Yeah. It's still all just PR. It's all just marketing stunts. And hey, that's what capitalism's all about. So good on them.
Then you got to make an NFT of it.
Exactly.
Oh boy. So now we get into our main story of the day, which is everyone's favorite new topic, the metaverse. It's not a new topic per se, but has since been brought into mainstream focus, thanks in large part to Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook's announcement a couple of weeks ago that they were renaming Facebook, the corporate entity, to Meta, to further emphasize their focus on the metaverse. And it's easy to be skeptical of this, but to be fair, Zuckerberg has been talking about this sort of thing for a few years now in all sorts of awkward demos with people with their avatars having, real life, business or personal meetings. And you see videos where people with goggles on their face, sitting in their bedrooms, cross-legged, talking to their friends who also have goggles on their faces, also showing some being able to kind of quote unquote teleport to like disaster regions. I think there was an earthquake in Central America a couple of years ago, and they did this demo. It was like, wow, look, you can actually look around and see the conditions. And it was branded as a little insensitive by some at the time, but it was pitched as a way for us to actually cultivate compassion toward others that are in like really horrifying situations. So so this is the context for the rebranding of the main company to Meta. Now they're not going under. They're not undergoing a corporate restructuring like Google did a few years ago. As some folks might recall, the parent company for Google is now known as Alphabet, and Google is a subsidiary of Alphabet. And so are other divisions like Nest, I believe, and YouTube is a subsidiary of Google. So it's a little bit Byzantine, but they're just part of it was to create different P&Ls. Part of it was to allow the founders, Sergey and Larry, to kind of go off and do their own thing. But with Facebook, they're not actually reorganizing the company at all. They're just kind of reorganizing the branding a little bit. So on all the apps, they've been updated already. Instead of saying Instagram by Facebook or WhatsApp by Facebook, and they just brought that in a year or two ago, which seemed kind of strange because Facebook was the bloom had already gone off that rose at that point. And so to push Facebook into people's faces seemed a little strange, but maybe they're giving it one last kick at the can. But now it says, Facebook by Meta, Instagram by Meta. So what do you think of, I mean, aside from the usual kind of skeptical, this is all marketing take, well, what do you think about the orientation of the main company toward the metaverse? Is this too, just your general thoughts?
Yeah, well, I don't think I'm as skeptical about this. The Mars ketchup thing is a totally different animal. For me, this does seem like it's slightly dystopian, but also understandable. The world is shifting more online. I think this whole concept of the metaverse has caught back on ever since we've all gone online and digitized ourselves in so many different ways online during the pandemic, and trying to find ways of connecting with people that make sense, because a lot of the things that we used to connect didn't work all that well. The Zoom connections didn't really catch on all that well. People got tired of them. It was a neat kind of technology to begin with. It made things kind of useful. But since then, it sort of, people just don't want to do online meetings. And so creating an environment in which you can interact with people and network with people in a way that makes a bit more human sense, it's an inevitability, I think. And Facebook is just trying to ride that prescient wave. The concern is, I come from I'm a big fan of online worlds, as you know, and I've been a fan of Second Life, which still exists. Yes, many people know from many years ago it was an online virtual world, and it still is. And there's a core of people who really still enjoy it and use it for social platforming, for making money with their own version of NFTs, in essence, where you can sell digital items that are unique if you want them to be. There's still some questions about duplicating things here and there, but it is an environment that works well. But one of the reasons it works well is because it's a very open platform and there's very little regulation. And I just don't see that necessarily happening with something like Facebook. I think it will become, as you referred to Facebook itself as or Google being a bit Byzantine. I think Facebook trying to create or engineer a metaverse of sorts, I think it'll be somewhat Byzantine. It's going to be very hard to just create a system that just works. The Second Life one has worked because it's evolved over getting close to 2 decades now. And if Facebook can create something like that, or if Meta can create something like that, more power to them. But human interaction is very nuanced, and that is very hard to just sort of encapsulate into some form of technology instantaneously.
So you mentioned dystopian at the outset, and I believe you've read Snow Crash.
One of my favorites.
So can you describe for us what is the nature of the metaverse depicted in Snow Crash? And it's Neil, is it Stevenson or Stephenson?
Stephenson, I believe it's Stephenson. The nature of it, it's It's been a while since I've read it. I can't remember the exact machinations of how you get into the metaverse, but I believe it is much like in Ready Player One by Ernst Klein. You have a set of goggles that you put on, and you basically take your senses away from your body, and they get put into this virtual digital world. And it seems like that's what the direction that Meta slash Facebook slash Zuckerberg is trying to take with this. Put on it's all virtual reality goggles, and you immerse yourself into a completely virtual world, and you network with people that way. And it makes sense. I think the technology is still in its nascent stages, and I don't know if people are going to really adopt it. There's not a lot of people that I know that are clamoring to get everything virtual so they can interact with people. People want to get back to interacting just in person, versus trying to find better ways of making things virtual. So I'm not sure about how it's actually going to go together. But when it comes to Snow Crash, yeah, it was the world itself was you were escaping a dystopian world to get into a utopian world, but the utopian world wasn't as utopian as everybody would like. There's still eventually things do become somewhat dystopian inside this digital utopia.
As we've seen in a number of other tales as well, including The Matrix, which took that on to another level too. So,
Exactly.
If you mentioned Ready Player One, when of course the world is a bit of a hellscape, and people use they go to the oasis to escape the drudgery of everyday life. And it seems that at this point, I mean, there are places in the world where people aren't terribly happy, they're not thriving, but for most, well, at least in the developed world where this would even be an option, do you think this is a solution looking for a problem? As you mentioned, it seems like a lot of us, especially in pandemic times, are looking to get back to real life as much as possible. How much time do we want to spend with goggles strapped to our heads, like escaping real life that we've actually been missing out on for the last year and a half?
Yeah, well, I think this is not a solution looking for a problem. I think this is another case of Facebook inadvertently glomming onto the poor nature of humanity. Whereas it's easier, if you can, just to curl up into a corner, into a little ball, and not have to deal with real life. There's more and more people are finding themselves disconnected from the world because they have been disconnected. And I don't think the solution to that is to put some goggles on and to pretend to be somebody else. We just don't live in a technological or a technocracy that allows us to do that kind of thing yet. Maybe in 100 years, maybe 150, when you can physically plug something into your brain and actually experience a whole nother life, that you will have sensory input that way. This just doesn't seem like this seems like it's really tapping into another downside of humanity, like Facebook has already done with segregating a lot of society based on their political beliefs. And it feels like this could actually harm people in the way that it will silo themselves into their world and into the networks that they choose to join within that world as well. So I don't see this as a very positive thing if it's developed by somebody like a Facebook, whose job it is really is not to introduce new technology, it's to sell advertising. That's what Meta does. They sell advertising. So if you think that you're going to be able to go into this thing and not have your information shared like Facebook does, you're sorely mistaken. It's really what it's all about. So I think hopefully there's some sort of arms race when it comes to metaverse technologies. And we'll have not just Facebook trying to dominate the marketplace. There'll be other companies that come along and compete for that space.
There are a number of sides to this story, which we're going to get into and explore in a little bit. But there's just two things that I want to touch on from what you've said there. Proponents of the advent of the metaverse might argue that a lot of the things that you've mentioned there regarding people sort of isolating and just going into this virtual world are similar to the advent of the web itself. And when people would they through their dial-up modems, they would enter this lo-fi virtual world, but what it actually let them do is connect with others on the others, it could be anywhere in the world, and find a sense of community, especially people who have have felt that they were lacking that community in their own small neighborhood, or especially in a small town or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
People that maybe have felt disenfranchised or isolated for one reason or another, it actually gave them an opportunity to connect with people that maybe felt the same way in other places. So you've seen these communities of interest that have gathered all over thanks to the web, for better or for worse. So maybe the metaverse is simply the next logical extension of this to enhance the engagement and the type of interaction we can have with these people. And next thing you know, you're in like some sort of sci-fi futuristic discotheque with some of these folks, and you're finding your community there. I mean, even during COVID times, we had people doing like virtual dance parties and whatnot. And it was, especially if people were the type to go out dancing on a regular basis. And so you had a live DJ streaming, and people had, the images and the music coming into their homes, and they were just home dancing by themselves. So, well, is there an answer that's somewhere in between here? Maybe it's like not an all or nothing. And does it have to be a dystopian sucking your thumb in the corner versus actually finding and maintaining connections and
so I think it's gradation. So this is so you bring up the modem type of thing, and you and I were part of that burgeoning digital network type of thing when we were growing up, and it was pretty exciting, and it was great to be able to connect with people on a very limited basis. And I think what that allowed us to do is to kind of is to just give us a taste and to kind of allow us to grow our networks in a slightly different way, but in a very small percentage. Maybe we increased things 10 to 15% of connectivity with bits and pieces here and there. And it was very limited. And I think this is maybe just allowing our brains, our wetware in our brains, we could enjoy some of that, and it did benefit things, and it has benefited things as we go and we go and we go. But the problem is we all of a sudden the technology took leaps and bounds, and we now have too much access. We have too much information. So I think the levels that we got to at one point were fine, but then we get to a certain level where all of a sudden we have this massive amount of information that overwhelms us with so much that we cannot sift through it. It's not possible for anybody to sift through it. And we lose some ability to be ourselves. And it's almost a bit of a mob mentality where you just follow along with what you're presented, because that's all you can do. You can't decide for yourself what's right or wrong because you have too much information to go through. So you just go with your one side, and okay, I'm there, and I go that way. So I think we've just overwhelmed our brains with connectivity, with networks, and it's a great thing. Being connected with people is really important. I think there's room for it, and I think just like we're doing right here, having this one-on-one chat, we could be having this in person, and I would be preferable in person. But if it wasn't possible, but I think it gets to a point where, again, the more immersive you make it, I think the easier it will be to silo oneself into certain perspectives, and you can't get out of those silos to broaden your horizons unless you're forced to. So there, it's too hard to really predict. Well, what do you think? Do you have concerns with this, or do you think this is technology that's going to somehow massively improve things? I just don't see a way. I don't see a pathway to improve things. I only see ways of making things worse. What do you think?
Well, I think it's trash, frankly, but I don't want to be
Tell me what you really think, Tristan. Come on now.
Too much. I think there are definitely some applications that could be handy there, but when it comes to either presenting myself as a real person versus like an avatar version of myself, I prefer as much reality as possible through a digital connection. But that's just me, and I understand that some people don't feel the same way. To your point about the information overload and how we lean on others to filter that information for us. I mean, that is what's led to the whole rise of the influencer, right? People that can sort through the stuff for us, and then spoon feed us the stuff that we should care about. The other side of the information overload is the social connection overload brought to you by social media. And
Exactly.
you're probably familiar with Dunbar's number. Like in the, evolutionarily speaking, we're wired to basically maintain relationships with about 150 people max. And that was kind of the number that we used to organize ourselves into as tribes as early humans. And human evolution actually moves pretty slowly. So all of a sudden, we've gone just in a matter of 3 decades to, kind of that sort of limit to a virtually infinite limit. And now we're expected to maintain relationships with, whether it's 800 Facebook friends, 2,100 LinkedIn connections, 6,000 Twitter followers, and so on and so on and so on. And there's just no way you can keep up. And are you sacrificing the quality of your most intimate relationships because you're worried about how someone's going to react about something you share on social media? And do you feel like you need to keep, performing on social media to feed the algorithm and to maintain your visibility and all of that sort of stuff? And then there are legitimate business reasons for doing so, but when it becomes performative on a personal level, it gets a little icky. And we see more and more of that as time goes on. And so this and the metaverse side of things, I mean, it seems to me it will only perpetuate that, which I'm not sure is a great thing.
I think I agree. I think this is a use case type of thing. I think we're trying to paint all human interaction with the same brush here, and by trying to create a metaverse for everything, I think is just too much. I think this should be done in stages. In any case, I see it as a good. One of the reasons I got into Second Life years ago is because I thought it would be great to be able to bring customers in to actually have them or their avatar come in and see a completed kitchen. Could I design a kitchen because that's what I do as a kitchen designer, design a kitchen in Second Life and then invite my clients in to see their completed kitchen. They could go around in their avatar and actually open drawers and see different colors, what kind of thing. And the technology back then was not that great. So I my software that I used outside of Second Life was much more useful. But nowadays, from what I understand, the technology is much better, and those kinds of things would be useful. And if you could actually put goggles on, physically visit your kitchen in a virtual world and test it out instead of just looking at plans or pictures, that would be very useful. And then that kind of use case thing makes much more sense than trying to just let's take all the entirety of human interaction and make it digital and see what happens. This is this whole thing that we have with technology these days. Social media is the prime example of, hey, let's just do this and see what happens to people. Yep. We're in the biggest social experiment.
Roll the dice.
Yeah, exactly. We don't really know what's happening. Well, we do know. I think some studies have shown that suicide rates amongst boys and girls have gone up, but amongst girls have gone up significantly over since 2013, which is when social media adoption really took hold. And correlation is not causation, but it seems to me, I think we can all agree there's something inherently unhealthy about social media obsession. And I think this is what we're continuing on when we get into creating a metaverse. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen with people. We don't know what's going to happen with kids, because eventually it's going to be like, oh, well, you got to be at least 13 years old to be able to go onto the metaverse. And then, oh, you know what? We've decided we're going to do metaverse for kids, and it's going to be okay because we're going to just do this and da 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 da. It's all about trying to get people's eyes onto screens. And in Meta's case / Facebook's case, it's just to sell advertising. Mm-hmm. Again, unless there's some new business model that they've come up with, but I don't think so. They haven't said anything about there's going to be no advertising at all. No, it'll be all advertising and selling your information to whoever's willing to buy it. So,
and to be fair, most free services that are out there are advertising businesses. True. Google is ostensibly
Absolutely.
a search engine, but they're an advertising business. So, the question is, would people pay for said search engine? Would people pay for Facebook, the metaverse, all that sort of thing? And free options do provide access for folks. So I think like it sort of harkens back to the advent of the automobile in a way. If you ask people back then what they wanted, they was like they want a faster horse, right? They weren't even thinking about like automobiles. And so there was some experimentation in form factor and style, and even electric versus gasoline. There was an initial war back then in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and then the market sort of went out, and there was a lot of trial and error and a number of fatalities. Even in the early days of airplane flight that you mentioned earlier, like air travel was not nearly as safe back in the early days as it is now. So some might say, well, if we were trying to avoid all harm, then we wouldn't do anything new. It's just a question of how do we mitigate those risks, keep the most vulnerable people, including our young people, safe as we try to push the envelope and see what applications make the most sense. And I'm with you. I appreciate and can understand some of those business applications for sure. But if once it comes to like getting all of our social interaction in there, that doesn't seem like particularly healthy. It could be a fun once in a while thing, or I know we've played online games before, even having Zoom sessions going simultaneously with Jackbox games, what have you. I mean, there could be some interesting aspects to explore for sure, but we should always be skeptical, always be thinking of the agendas of the organizations involved. And to Zuckerberg's credit, what he has mentioned is the idea of making it open to a certain extent so that you could plug offerings from others together. Of course, any single company is going to want to dominate. They want to be the one place, but he also has a lot of governments looking very closely at what Meta is doing these days. So, you've got to say the right things and make things as interoperable as possible if you want to keep in the government's good books, with antitrust and all that sort of stuff. So when it's something so critical to this, do we want the Ready Player One universe where there's one giant company that is controlling the Oasis or the metaverse, or could we have a series of metaverses that could connect to each other through a series of portals, for example, whatever the form it takes? I mean, that could be kind of interesting. And when you think about it, we already have those things in silos today. You mentioned Second Life. We look at Minecraft, you look at Roblox, you look at all sorts of other online games, Fortnite and otherwise. There are people spending millions and millions of man hours inside of these metaverses of their own sorts, and playing games, talking to each other and whatnot. And one could debate the merits of the health aspects of that, especially as regards sitting indoors playing video games versus going outside, just like our mums used to tell us back in the 80s. So it's like these problems aren't new necessarily, they just take on different forms. So to that end, there has been quite a lot of ink spilled in the last couple of weeks on the topic of the metaverse, and particularly Meta's ambitions. A very thoughtful article from Ben Thompson of Stratechery, who is very well regarded in the tech industry, does lots of long form articles and podcasts on topics like this. We've got an article in New York Magazine, who's very skeptical about the Facebook's metaverse, calling it dead on arrival, and they go into their rationales there. And we'll include these links in the show notes. Another angle that's interesting and perhaps that has been talked about a bit is the notion of NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, which we've talked about here on Momentous in the past a number of times. Is that, and we didn't call them this when it came to Second Life, but there's this whole other virtual economy that can emerge that you see in other video games, like people either paying real world money in exchange for in-game currency, or earning in-game currency to buy gear or emotes, special dance moves and all that sorts of thing, say in Fortnite. So might NFTs, which can be minted in limited editions, not able to easily copy and so on, have a chain of possession and authenticity and all that sort of stuff. This is another aspect to the metaverse that may appeal to the the desire for some of us to be able to own things and to differentiate ourselves online. Could you explain for us a little bit about the in-game economy in Second Life? And because you participated in that a little bit too, and how that easily transfer into NFTs in the metaverse.
Yeah, well, the way it would work is in the game back in the day, you could build things, which was the way you would build things is you could create a cube or a circle or a torus or spheres, whatever it was, and then join them together, texture them, and create objects, three-dimensional looking objects in this world, and then you could actually sort of mint them as an item and then put a price tag on them. And then you could either set them as a copyable, or modifiable or transferable, or combinations of those different things. So you could uncheck everything so people could buy one item and then it became theirs, and that was it. They couldn't give it to anybody else. They couldn't do anything with it from there. Or you could set it as transferable, where you would buy it and then you could then give it to somebody else. Or you could modify it, where you could actually tweak those pieces that you put together, or you could copy it and then you could take it and then you could copy it and give copies to everybody. So it was kind of a unique way of creating this kind of thing. And at one point there was some technology created where you could actually go in and copy items, because it was all just information at that point, and the information was stored on a server. So you could just copy that information and make a whole new one. And at that point, and I'm assuming now, there was no certificate of authenticity necessarily. So you just wanted an item, so you could get that same item copied. It wouldn't be from the original creator, so the creator wouldn't make money on it. And so there was some issue with that, if I remember correctly. Copy bots. There was a copy bot. That's what it was. So if you had an item, you could copy that item. So I don't know how that would be solved with an NFT type system other than a certificate of authenticity. But if you could still copy the information, it would be like taking a car and copying a car and making another car, and you didn't have the chain of authenticity, the chain of ownership from there, but it's still a car. So you still have this car. It's still the color that you want, still drives the same way, does whatever. It just isn't an actual, a properly bought one. So in essence, it's almost like stealing at that point. So maybe there's some laws that would have to be created, or maybe we wouldn't have to create laws. I'm not sure.
I think the risk of that sort of thing would be dictated by the APIs, the application programming interfaces. How
Probably.
easy to actually copy an item in game, to clone it for others. If you make the blockchain part of it integral to the specific metaverse, then that you can
Probably.
make that pretty hard to do. But what I'm looking for is are chop shops where you can take existing vehicles, like you mentioned,
Yes,
and you could steal someone's, take it to a chop shop, and then sell it for parts.
I know there's, because things have to be made in parts like that, like they are in real life, and then assembled to create a whole new item which has its own NFT.
That could be an option, and that's actually kind of interesting and creative, right? You could end up with the Homer Simpson car.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and actually, so again, back to Second Life, I wasn't ever involved in this, but there was things called breedables at one point, where you could actually, there was some sort of technology where you could actually farm these different creatures, and then they would breed, and you would make a new one, and you could sell them to other people who would then breed them as other things, and they weren't copyable or something. I don't really know, but again, all these, and this goes to the uniqueness of an open metaverse or open virtual environment, where these things were just created by people who understood how to code and just made these whole subsystems within the virtual world that didn't exist. They weren't part of the metaverse to begin with, but people found ways of creating their own technologies within this virtual world in order to make their own economies. And so it was kind of fascinating, again, the way things evolved in that regard.
Yeah, and that's the key thing, is that if you can put the rails in place to have these systems interact and interoperate with each other, which has led to the explosion of the web, for example, thanks to HTML. It's like the building blocks, at least on the front end, for the web. And if you have a similar sort of markup language, or APIs to enable different developers to connect in there. You need a consortium to come up with a set of rules, just like you have the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. And that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the W3C actually gets involved because they're sort of regarded as a neutral arbiter with a lot of stakeholders in there. So maybe that's the sort of thing that we could, that could help the metaverse actually gain a toehold with players like Meta and others that we're going to talk about in just a moment, because Meta is not the only one that is exploring this realm at the moment. And just as a little addendum to the notion of NFTs or in-game products that you may buy, sell, trade, and so on, there's the whole cryptocurrency angle with so much of these NFTs are being exchanged using the Ethereum blockchain. So that could be a key part of the metaverse. I mean, there's in the courses that I've taught over the last several years, one of the things that I tend to do is talk about the history of the internet and the web. And we talked about Web 1.0 in the 90s, which tended to be pretty broadcast oriented. You had fairly technical people setting up websites on servers, and it was mostly a one-way interaction. Then Web 2.0 in the mid 2000s, where you got the social web, and then anyone with very little skill could set up a blog, anyone could leave a comment on someone else's website. You could easily upload things, photos or videos to different sites such as Flickr and YouTube and eventually Instagram. And as part of this ongoing history, Web 3.0 has been struggling to find an official definition. And there's been a few different versions of that. One was some people are calling the Internet of Things Web 3.0 with all your online, like, Google Nest cameras and, fitness trackers and things like that. But then another definition was like the semantic web, which had to do with the using machine learning to tease out the meaning of information on the web, even so far down to like voice requests and translations and things like that. But then another definition of Web 3.0 that we've seen in the last couple of years really has to do with the decentralized web using blockchain cryptocurrencies such as Ethereum and Bitcoin networks to help usher in whatever the next version of the web is actually going to be. And not like there's a switch that anyone flips to go from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0, but it's this interesting organic process to see what becomes the dominant thing that people eventually call, okay, now we're in the Web 3.0 world. And maybe that's the decentralized metaverse where commerce is enabled by the blockchain and all this sort of stuff. So, but the interesting angle to the whole Meta/Facebook side of things is that I think they understand how hard it is to get people to wrap their mind around it. So they're taking the route that, Gateway Computers did initially, and then Apple in the early 2000s, like, let's set up a series of stores where people could go and try these devices on the Oculus goggles and see what it's like to give them a little taste of what it might be like to interact in the metaverse. What do you think of that as a strategy?
Well, I don't know if it's actually going to be all that useful if they try that, because the reason that the metaverse, I think, they're hoping it's going to be addictive is because of its networking abilities in the social aspect, to be able to actually talk to other people that that you can interact with them much easier. If you just simply put the goggles on and all of a sudden you're in a 3D world, well, that's great and everything, but I think the idea would be to the real killer app is to get people to talk to other people and be able to easily connect with people online. And maybe you have people on the other end who are greeters, and you go in and you can start talking to somebody else that you don't know. And
they have to wear blue aprons, though.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. But I just don't see that as being the way to actually get people excited about it. Is to go in and be able to be social with people. And maybe you do put people into the middle of a club or onto a beach with other people, or onto into a basketball court, and you play with people this way. I don't really know, but having stores, I guess it's an interesting idea, but it's not like you're going in and you're at Costco and you're tasting the latest sausage recipe, and like, oh, okay, I'll
Not
buy
not
that.
in
That's
COVID
great.
times. Not in COVID times. Not my
Exactly.
first
I think
apple.
that it's coming back. I think it's coming back. So I don't see, hey, if they can come up with a way of showing people, hey, this is what the metaverse is,
Mhm.
try this on for 5 minutes and you're hooked. Great. I just don't know what that would be. I think it would be just like putting the old Oculus on and going on a roller coaster ride and say, wow, that's kind of cool. I don't need to do that every day. And they're really, it's got to be a much more intense long-term introduction into something like that that makes it worthwhile. I think you have to really give those good use case scenarios to people and say, here's why you need it. It's almost like what we're going through right now with cryptocurrencies. That's tough enough trying to get people to get on board with whether it be a Bitcoin or Ether or any of the other multiple cryptocurrencies out there. There's a lot of people that are super excited about it and really want people to get on board here because look at all the benefits. Most people are like, well, I don't get it. I don't see what the point is. Explain. Yeah, okay, it's this virtual thing and it's like gold, but it's not really gold, and it's this, and you can transfer it, and so something like the metaverse, I think, is really going to, you have to show people, here's how it's actually going to make your life better, more practical or more whatever. And I just don't see how they're going to do that very effectively by having a store where you try something on for 5 minutes. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I remember the roller coaster demo that you're referring to.
Yeah.
A mutual friend of ours who had the original Oculus Rift dev kit, and that was cool. And I remember thinking at the time, I can see this for gaming, maybe, but what else is
Exactly.
is it a solution looking for a problem? Now, you were a pretty early adopter of, was it the Samsung Gear
Yes, I
VR?
still have it. Yeah, yeah. My old Samsung S7, or was it an S9 that I had at the time? I can't remember which one it was, but you could actually slot it in into the headset. You just bought it for 150
Mhm.
bucks, the headset, and yeah, and I used it, and it was interesting. And you could watch a movie like you were in a theater, and it was kind of interesting that way. There was no real, I think there was some sort of social connection that you could create with other people that you knew or could know, but it didn't really stick. I think it's sitting in a cupboard somewhere. If I was smart, I would have brought it today and had it to show you. But yes, it's one of these things where it's a gimmick. It's a gimmick, and it still seems very gimmicky to me. And I think it will continue to be a gimmick until somebody says, "Well, here's why it will make your life better," rather than just be something else you can do. We'll have to see what they come up with. But I haven't really been given a tangible, here's what the metaverse is and here's why it's going to make your life better. I just have not had that yet. And I don't know if you've seen anything that way or if Zuckerberg has said anything about that, but it's just more like, oh, this is coming and we're going to give it to you. That's all it seems to be.
I think there are definitely opportunities for educational purposes there. I tried on one of the Samsung devices at a, it was at a corporate event, and I slapped it on, and next thing I knew, I was surrounded by dinosaurs, and that was actually pretty cool. Like the fidelity was probably not where it could be at today,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot of horsepower required to drive to high resolution monitors, because they need to be 4K or even 8K
Yes.
to, for when it's so close to your eyes, for it to be realistic for folks. And also the lag time needs to be super low for your head turns so you don't get
Mm-hmm.
motion sickness. So there's
Yes.
technical issues that they've been working through, not to mention the practical issues such as wired versus wireless. Do you have a
Mm-hmm.
harness attached, or do you have the wireless bandwidth to be feeding these high resolution screens, and so on? So I think there could be some really interesting interactive educational
I
purposes
agree,
there.
but
Yeah.
these are small use cases
Yeah.
and little things here and there. It's not. It doesn't seem
Well,
like it's going to
education's a
be
pretty big thing when you like,
whatever,
right?
whatever.
But so when you were testing out your Samsung Gear
Mm,
VR device,
yeah.
aside from movie watching, what other things did you test, and which of those were the most compelling?
There was some games, and I can't really remember. Again, I
Okay.
don't even. I don't.
Mhm.
I tried it out, and I like. Wow, this is kind of neat. Interesting idea. We can do this. There was some. There was a. I remember a 360 degree movie where you could sort of sit there and then spin around and see this movie going on in 360 degrees around you. Oh, that was kind of a neat concept, a little bit of art, interesting artwork. But I don't really remember there being anything like, wow, this is something that I can see evolving into. Something I could really use or really get into down the road. It felt very isolating to me. It really did isolate me into my own world, and I didn't feel like I felt very separate from the world around me, and that didn't feel great. I didn't really. That wasn't exciting. That's something I wanted to continue to do. So I haven't
friends in there with you.
What's that?
You just needed some friends in there with
That's you. Right. That's right. Yeah, but it made me. There was nothing that even since then has made me want to go back and buy the new Oculus viewers or anything, because I just don't see what the point is at this point. Again, I need to see something come out that says, "Oh, here's why it's going to make your life better." Just give it a go, and hey, at that point, yeah, go to the Facebook or Meta store and try it on, and then I'll say, here's what I've been missing. I didn't know I was missing this my entire life. Now I have this. This will make everything so much better. Hey, if they can do that, more power to them. I got to see that first, and I just don't know what that could be. I haven't been able to get my head wrapped around that.
Well, I always found it funny that one of the main applications that was touted was being able to watch something like Netflix on these goggles, but then, actually you're in a room on a couch watching Netflix on a TV on the wall.
It's like, very weird.
I could be doing this in the real world at home, but I guess if some people don't have like big screen TVs, then it's, you get a larger virtual screen in front of you, but it's just like, it's very meta.
Well, and ironically, and I guess the reality is, if you look at something like the Ready Player One story, whether it be the book or the movie, it makes sense in those kinds of worlds because the world has become dystopian and they need an escape. They need to get out of this horrible existence where your bed is on the top of the washer and dryer because that's the only room in the house for you to sleep in and you have nothing else. So you might as well get yourself immersed in this virtual world where you can at least have some fun and some enjoyment where you just don't get that in the real world. But we're just not there yet. We need the world to become more dystopian, and then Meta's way of doing things will make all the sense in the world. So I think Zuckerberg maybe has some ulterior motives here.
Challenge accepted. Let's make the world more dystopian.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, as long as our virtual movie theaters have floors that aren't sticky, I think.
Yeah. Well, no, that's part of the charm, isn't
it? So speaking of dystopian, just a little coda to the Facebook side of this metaverse story is that earlier this week or late last week, especially under so much recent scrutiny, Meta and their subsidiary now, Facebook, has said that they will not use facial recognition software anymore in the Facebook network, and has claimed to have purged all the facial recognition data that they have amassed over the last number of years. And they did that ostensibly to be able to help facilitate automatic tagging of photos, so they get to know who's who. Then it makes it easier for people to get tagged, and it's the social sharing of photos. People get notified, oh, you've been tagged in a photo. Isn't that wonderful? Now, of course, there's the perhaps ulterior motives of that, trying to really figure out, if they know who's in whose photos and try to divine the nature of the relationships between those people, just to build their social graph on the Facebook side, the invisible side of the social graph. And of course, there's the whole advertising side of that too. So Facebook is trying to keep their nose clean here, and they're saying, okay, we're going to get rid of all of this. But the punchline is, they say, well, but maybe for the metaverse, we might still use facial recognition data because it could have some potential use cases. Of course, they haven't really gone into detail what those use cases might be. And who knows how facial recognition might even work in the metaverse, especially if you're using virtual avatars. So that remains to be seen on that. But I just thought that was an interesting little coda to this discussion, at least on the Facebook side of things, because it's like we're being good guys, we're the good guys, but we're just going to keep this little thing in our back pocket because we're not sure how valuable this could be for the next chapter of our business. Mm-hmm. But Facebook is not the only ones exploring the potential of the metaverse. Of course, Microsoft is rolling out its own metaverse. And for time, we're not going to get too into detail on this, but there's a couple sides of this. There's the business side that they want to explore when it comes to integration into something, say, like Microsoft Teams, Together Mode, all the sorts of things that we could do to enable communication. Again, it raises the obvious question: would you rather be talking to each other using your real faces or these virtual faces? And then, of course, there is the gaming side of things with the Microsoft Xbox platform. And apparently they're planning 3D metaverse apps for Xbox and all their gaming endeavors, such as Minecraft, Halo, and Flight Sim, which already have their own metaverses, like we alluded to earlier. What's your hot take on Microsoft? Even the president of Microsoft, not the CEO, but the president, is trying to kind of downplay some of the hype on this. But at the same time, like we're just so you know, we're not being left behind. We're doing our own stuff as well. We've been building this stuff for years. But what's your quick take on the Microsoft side of things? Does it seem more practical to you, or is it just like trying to be a Me Too?
Well, I think it's wise. Again, I think having multiple metaverses competing makes everybody better. It's always better than just giving one company the opportunity to try and do something and say, well, that's all you get. This is the metaverse and you can't have anything else. So, Microsoft is, they've, over the last 5 years or so, have tried to be more innovative with some of their things that they're doing. I think they're jumping on a bit of a bandwagon here and saying, here's where we're at. They bought Minecraft, I think, a few years ago, and are mining that one for all it's worth. And part of it will probably be a metaverse tie-in. So again, for me, it's just another way of selling a product and making money. There's nothing really much more magical about this than that. It's trying to find something that people want to buy or buy into. And whether it's Meta doing it or Microsoft doing it or Sony or Apple or whatever it is, it's all just trying to sell a product. So I think the biggest application will be gaming, immersive style gaming, or immersive types of first-person movies that you could get involved with. Those kinds of things I think will be really enjoyable, but I just don't see humanity really getting anywhere near to saying, "Oh, this is way better than just talking to somebody in person." Even though it's harder to get together sometimes, there's a value in that too. I think we're missing the fact that, to make connections, face-to-face connections, almost too easy sometimes can devalue that relationship. Putting an effort into going to somebody's house or making dinner for them or playing a game together face to face and putting the effort into creating something like that I think elevates the value of that kind of relationship. So something like creating all these metaverses to make people getting together might have the inverse effect of kind of cheapening connectivity and making it too easy for people to get together. And all of a sudden it becomes, it takes away the quality of a real life connection. So there's things about humanity we just don't understand. We don't understand how important we do understand how important it is to have face-to-face connections. And you know what? One of the biggest things I think that we're going to be missing here until some technology comes around to really solve this is facial cues. When you talk to somebody, we've learned this with wearing all the masks as of late. If you're talking to somebody, you get a lot of information back of how they're feeling based on their facial cues. If all you have is an avatar that you're talking to, you don't see those same cues that we've evolved to understand. And I think there's, again, I'm kind of being real negative Nelly here, but there's something about it that's just not making sense to me.
Well, yeah, don't even get me started on the generation of children who during their formative years are all masked up at school, which you understand why, but like they're missing half the face. And what are going to be the long-term implications of that, alongside with the long-term implications of, now a couple of generations of young people who have spent more and more time online in these virtual worlds, even if they haven't been metaverses per se, but online gaming and whatnot, and what's the opportunity cost there versus versus the amount of time they could be interacting in the real world. Like, it's great to find connection online, but it's even better because we are bound to this real world in a lot of very practical ways that, it is a lot of this online time coming at the expense of our real world social skills and interactions. So, that's the kind of thing that makes you feel old, right? And it's like, if you're having conversations with people and they can't even look you in the eye because they feel uncomfortable by it, it's like, well, we've been doing this for literally hundreds of thousands of years. Like, we shouldn't, all these brains being rewired, especially at young ages, to not really understand how to operate in the real world. I think that is a bit of a concern. We don't want to be too pearl clutchy about it, but these are things to keep an eye on for sure. And I know that you've mentioned in the past about things like parental supervision and engagements and whatnot. We want to limit these kinds of things, limit screen time and whatnot, make sure that we, the children understand who the parents are, who the actual bosses are, and that ultimately they're looking out for their own long-term best interests. So, of course, now Microsoft's not the only one. Niantic, who you have a long-term or had a long-term relationship with in the past as the makers of course, now the Ingress and later Pokemon Go, and then there was a Harry Potter augmented reality game they did as well. So Niantic were pioneers in augmented reality gaming, where you could take your smartphone out into the real world and go on quests and capture portals and have Pokemon battle each other and all these sorts of interesting things. And it seems like the logical next step for them to be building this real world metaverse apps. So they want their software to be powering future AR glasses. Now, given your experience with Ingress and a little bit with Pokemon Go in the past, do you think from an understanding of how these sorts of worlds might work, that Niantic is well positioned to be a key player in the metaverse generation of the web?
Well, I understand the original intent of John Hankey, I think his name, or Hank, or something like that, was to actually create games that made people move. That was his whole philosophy. So he wanted people to go outside and actually play games outside. So that was the impetus behind creating the Ingress game when he was with Google. Niantic was a Google property, and then it spun out after that. So the philosophy is not about wasn't really about augmented reality necessarily. It was about getting people moving. Again, it's a lot of it was data harvesting as well. Players would go and they would create portals at points of interest that would then actually get fed into another Niantic app, which was called Field Trip, I believe. And so that information was used for more advertising uses that way. So it was an interesting way of getting information via gaming. You know what? Hey, it's a business thing. I like the idea of augmented reality stuff a little bit. I don't really. Again, use case thing. I don't really understand other than gaming or something like the Microsoft Holo. I think that's what it's called, where you could create models and then twist them on tables and all that kind of stuff within augmented reality. Yeah, it's an interesting technology.
And for those, playing at home, the augmented reality or AR being where you still have a window into the real world, but you have imagery projected on some sort of viewing device, eventually just lightweight glasses, hopefully, whereas VR or virtual reality, you tend to be totally isolated into this virtual world and you cannot normally see through. There's also what is sometimes known as mixed reality, MR, or extended reality, XR, and they're basically just different flavors of augmented reality as well. And to your point, Jamie, one of the things that Hankey did make sure to emphasize, he says there's a fork in the road. One path goes in this direction of apps that are not connected to the world around us and are not helping us connect with the people who are we around. The path that they are taking with their Lightship project is encouraging people to do things together with other folks who are alive.
That
Hallelujah.
it's a little bit hyperbolic, I would say,
Mhm,
because you're going to be interacting with people who are alive, who do have personalities. And again, this is something that I learned with the Second Life: is you
mhm,
can interact with people from all over the world in that environment, and they're real people with real feelings and thoughts and
mhm,
ideas, and so it's just different representations of them. But yeah, there is something lost if you don't have an actual human person that you can see and talk to and see their normal human reaction when you speak to them and interact with them. So there is a value to it, but I don't know how much you can do with a world that exists. Well, it's almost like you would need to have augmented reality centers where you could go to and have a big open room with, you could be with other people in that same room, and then you could create an environment within that room, but with other people, I suppose. Again, I don't really understand what is going to be created with this augmented reality. If you're just laying it over top of the world as it is it going to be like the Terminator, where you have heads up displays where you can look at somebody and it'll bring up the names of their kids and their wife, so you don't forget that stuff, or the things you have on the calendar scheduled with them, when the birthday is, and is that what it's going to turn into, where it's just a heads up display kind of thing? I don't know. I got to see what it's useful for. So yes, I can see where they want to get into it and
mhm.
be the gatekeepers of this technology for other companies, and they'll probably be good at it. But what that's actually going to create, I don't know.
You got to admit, it would be pretty handy to know someone's pulse rate, blood pressure, pupil dilation, all that, and distance for targeting could
Yeah,
come in
and all their
handy.
pressure points, so you could give them the Vulcan death pinch and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Exactly. One other little article that informs this discussion too is from Fast Company on how the metaverse will change transportation as we know it. I mean, there's the obvious side of things like, well, maybe people will have to travel less, and we've seen that during the pandemic as well, thanks to video conferencing technologies. But this article goes into the how transit systems may evolve, and even airports and whatnot, and to accommodate people who might be using augmented reality or virtual reality as part of their travels. And also it touches upon the whole notion of doing some types of remote work, being able to like supervise certain job sites. Or there was that whole thing that was been talked about for years and years, like telemedicine, but actually being able to remotely control robot surgery tools. And in this article, it talks about people being able to survey their crops and whatnot. So just another angle to this. I think, again, as time goes on and experimentation goes on, we will start to learn which uses actually make sense and which are just kind of like, is this really making
Yeah.
things better at all? Just one little thing that you had mentioned about
Mm.
the relationship aspect of it too. Now, it is true that people can forge relationships online
Mhm.
without, without meeting people in person. And sometimes people, like I've met people online, like in the 90s, and later met them in person. And that's been cool. And we've maintained ongoing relationships. But when you were playing Ingress, for example, I think there was that extra acceleration of relationship development by actually meeting people in the real world, because you would have these
Mhm.
events that would happen. You were on the same team, so there's a bit of bonding there. Of course, there's the tribalism that emerged as well.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah, it's
can you comment on the nature of the relationships that you've forged there and how that may have compared to if it
oh
was
yeah,
purely an
yeah.
online
Well,
experience?
yeah, and it was something that I would always comment on when there would be get-togethers. For the game was designed to force people to get together in certain groups. You needed a certain number of people to come together to create uh, bigger portals, is I guess the way to describe it.
Mhm.
So you would meet up with people, and that you could then, okay, let's go do this, let's go do this. So it was a really neat idea to actually forge some interesting relationships. And again, that's I think a great way of using augmented reality, is to bring people together in and from very disparate backgrounds. So I still have friends from, I haven't played Ingress in a long time, but I still have friends from there, because I guess it maybe the people who wanted to play the game saw the value in doing something outdoors, doing something that would introduce you to new people. It would force you to meet new people in many ways, because there's some people that would play that were not super social, but they really did crave some sort of connection with people. And there was a bit of nerdiness to it. I suppose I would still call myself a bit of a nerd. I do like technology, and I enjoy using it in many different ways. So when those people all got together, we're all like, oh, hey, this is kind of fun. Of course, there were some people I really quite disliked that I met as well. It's just, as you find in the real world, there's some people you like and some people you don't. But it was just another way of forging social connection that any of the other games I never really found. But some of these people that I met played Ingress, played Pokemon Go, and they actually made connections that way too. So yeah, there's ways of bringing people together using augmented reality for sure. The virtual reality, it's still there, but it's different. Again, that face-to-face physical connection is an important thing.
So on the nature of relationships we can forge on the metaverse, at this point, still TBD.
Yes,
to be determined.
Absolutely.
So, it's harvest season now, and one of the things that maybe someday we'll get to experience in the metaverse are 7.9 kilogram potatoes. And we didn't want to leave that out from today's episode, because I know, Jamie, in your past gardening efforts that you have grown some gigantic pumpkins.
I have,
for example. Yes. But look at this Chungus potato.
That's an ugly looking potato, though, too, isn't it?
I just thought that'd be fun to share. Could claim a world record. What do you recall? What the largest or heaviest pumpkin was that you ever harvested?
I never tried the real giant ones. I got some fairly decent ones. Mm-hmm. I was never really good at getting them super huge. I always just made them good jack-o'-lantern size. That was always my key thing. But I do know somebody who's put some real effort into trying to grow some real big pumpkins. It's usually just based on the seed. You got to get the right seed from the right parent pumpkin, and then you can get some good ones. And that would I think that would require too much effort on my end. So I just got normal sized pumpkins.
Well, when it comes to oversized monstrosities, especially in the animal kingdom, no one beats Australia. I recently discovered a rat-sized moth. Wow. Wingspan maybe about 10 inches, they figure. They get so big, this is a female, because they can carry up to 20,000 eggs.
Wow.
Can you imagine, encountering one of that? Boy, turn your lights off. That's all I can say.
There's probably lots of good protein, though, for when the apocalypse does come.
That's a fair point too. Now we just got to start breeding crickets that size. But I can't even imagine, if someone got really angry with one and stepped on it. It's like, oh, so anyway, welcome to Momentous, home of the metaverse and monstrosity potatoes and moths. So giving real life Mothra an actual venue to get some exposure in the world. Speaking of real life people and our own favorite version of Mothra, Tasia Custodi has another video for us this week on Gmail tips, best hidden Gmail features. So that was her YouTube video this week. Jamie, you're a Gmail user?
Partially.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Do you have any particular features, hidden or otherwise, that you like to use? Why, when you use Gmail, what sets it apart from other ways to access your email?
No, Gmail I find is the most. It's fairly ubiquitous. Being web-based, it makes things a lot easier rather than using my typical POP3 servers, that kind of thing, or IMAP servers. So it's more. I sometimes struggle with Gmail, actually, just because some of the features are almost too advanced for me, and I don't know how to organize things very well. But it's kind of handy for making sure that things are organized as best as possible, and it's very secure, I would say. And but when it comes to actual specific features, no, I'm not. Tasia's the one to talk to about that.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that set Gmail apart in the early days was the whole notion, this is very typical of Google coming from their engineering first mindset, is that, hey, wait a sec, you don't need to put emails in folders, you just need to tag them. And that means they go in these virtual folders and they could actually be in more than one at a time. So the question is, how many people actually tag their email messages? A lot of regular folks have grown up with, when I say regular folks, that seems a little normative, but a lot of folks traditionally have grown up with the computing paradigm of the desktop and folders and filing cabinets, all that sort of stuff. So we kind of apply that to other, filing paper and emails. It just sort of makes sense. But now when we get into tagging, that's next level. And Gmail is very powerful, especially given its extensibility, all the extensions you can install into it and whatnot. I'm not a fan of it myself at all. I'm not a fan of the interface. I don't like using email on the web. I prefer native email clients, whether it's on our computers or our smartphones or tablets. I think the web should be for web stuff and email should be an email client, but I'm old school that way. So, but Tasia is being very into a lot of the Google's offerings, does a good job of exploring various features in Google products, including Gmail. So I encourage you to check it out at youtube.com/Tasia Custodi. And Jamie, maybe you can reignite a little love affair with Gmail again.
Sounds good.
Yeah. And if you want to find out more about Momentous, you can find us at momentous.tv, twitter.com/momentous.tv, facebook.com/momentous.tv, instagram.com/momentous.tv. And as for YouTube, search my name here and look for one of the Momentous playlists, and you can subscribe to the Momentous channel there too. We never ask you to like or subscribe or follow, but I'm asking you now. Like, subscribe, follow. We're 36 episodes here. That includes you, Jamie. Like, subscribe, and follow, and all the things on the socials. Jamie, I really appreciate you joining us again this week. And you're pitching in when everyone else just abandoned us. It's gone to the winds.
I'm the stalwart now, taking the mantle from Will.
Exactly. Poor Will. Yeah, he's been pretty good. This is only the second he's missed, and we actually tried to get him online, but the hotel he was at his undisclosed location couldn't get the Wi-Fi working properly.
Yeah.
But next week, if the stars align, we should have their full regular complement back. That's Gray Williams, Tasia Custodi, Will Silver, and me, Tristan Jutra. But just in case, maybe Jamie. We don't like to ask Jamie to come on too much, but we always appreciate it.
I'm happy to help.
You're here.
I can talk. So
thank you.
It works out okay.
Thank you, old friends, and to you, and all the rest of the three of you that might be out there. I hope your week is truly momentous. See you next time.